Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Carla Alegria, the Project Manager with the National Center on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health. Today's webinar, Faith and Spirituality in Trauma Resilience, Recovery and Healing, a panel discussion and new guide on domestic violence and sexual violence advocates, will be moderated by Gabriela Zapata Alma. Before we get started, I would like to go over some of the technical details of the Webex software that we'll be using for today's webinar. Please be aware that your screen might look a little different depending on whether you're using a Mac or PC. On the right-hand side of the screen, there are a few boxes. Towards the bottom is the chat feature. You may have to click on the chat icon at the bottom right of your screen to open your chat box. This feature will allow you to provide feedback and share resources with your colleagues, as well as get in contact with the presenter if you have questions regarding the training content. You could contact me if you have questions troubleshooting the Webex software. To do this, click the down-facing arrow and select the person you would like to contact. You'll see a lot of options, but for this session, you'll want to click Everyone if you would like to respond to a question for the presenter or to contact center staff anytime during the session. So let's test this chat feature. Will everyone please go to the chat box, click on Everyone, type in where you're calling from, and press Enter. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you all very much. While you can get a lot out of this chat feature, there are times when it moves really quickly and it can feel distracting. If this is true for you, feel free to minimize the chat box by clicking the arrow next to where it says chat. You can always open it again with the same arrow if you choose. We will be providing live captioning during this webinar. Below the chat box, there is a multimedia viewer box. This will contain the captions. If you do not want to see the captions, click on the down-facing arrow next to the word multimedia viewer, the same way you might if you want to hide the chat box. We will moderate the Q&A towards the end via the chat box, and at the very end of the webinar, you'll be taken to a brief survey. Please take a moment to let us know what was useful and what could have been better. If you get disconnected at any point, return to the email you received with the original webinar link and re-enter the training. Sometimes the sound cuts out due to internet connection, so feel free to call back if that is a problem for you. If you are experiencing technical difficulties and are unable to contact me, please reach out to the Webex tech support to resolve any issues. That phone number, which I'll post in the chat box, is 1-866-229-3239. Again, thank you for joining us today. I'll now turn it over to Gabriela.
Hi everyone, welcome. We're so glad that you can make it today. And if you want to share this recording in the future, it'll be available on our webinar library. So today we are so glad to share with y'all this amazing panel discussion on faith and spirituality and trauma resilience, recovery, and healing, as well as our new guide. We hope that this new guide can be a resource for applying an accessible, culturally responsive, and trauma-informed approach for survivors who want to be able to talk about their faith, their spirituality, how it presents unique challenges, as well as how it also can be unique resources for folks. All within, of course, providing, or I should say actually offering, survivor-defined and survivor-led services. So this guide was developed in response to the self-defined needs of survivors within advocacy services. But a lot of the information, the resources, and the strategies can also be useful across fields, as well as with other forms of interpersonal violence. So we are just so excited to introduce our panelists. So our panelists are Belinda Stiles, LCSW. Belinda currently serves as the Director of Integrative Behavioral Health Services at Howard Brown Health. Much of her background has been providing direct clinical services to youth, adults, and families growing through anxiety, depression, school-related behavioral concerns, substance use, trauma, and life transitions around health diagnoses and self-identity. In recent years, she's worked as an administrator who focuses on bringing the voices of frontline team members to the decision-making process on an executive level. She also facilitates trainings on mental health and substance use. Next, we have Bonnie Violent. Bonnie is a trans femme genderqueer spiritual drag artist and digital chaplain. She's a YouTuber, Twitcher, and host of a Queer Chaplain podcast with such series as Drag and Spirituality, Trans Spirit, and Faith Leaders. She's a co-host of Splintered Grace with her conservative Christian aunt, and as well as At the CCC Recovery podcast. Bonnie shares her experience of strength and hope with HIV, recovering from drugs, alcohol, and sexual assault, among other things, in classrooms, community centers, churches, online, and pretty much anywhere they'll let her. As a queer chaplain, she's present with people in death and dying to self by helping to lace one's narrative with a spiritual thread to remind one of their resilience, strength, and faith in self, and create serenity in the now. Next, we have Jeanette Garcia. Jeanette has worked at Haven Women's Center of Stanislaus for over 24 years, providing services to people impacted by domestic or sexual violence. She's currently the training manager at Haven. She facilitates support groups and treatment centers, focusing on the connection between substance use and trauma. Jeanette has 29 years clean and sober, and spirituality is at the core of her recovery and healing. And then finally, Karen Transgaard Scott, Executive Director of the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. Karen is working toward a world in which all people thrive. Currently, she's focused on building solidarity with others who live to end violence across social spectrums with a focus on gender-based violence. Ms. Transgaard Scott has worked in the field since 1995, first at Tri-County Help Center in Ohio, and since 2007 at the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, where she's the executive director. In 2020, Transgaard Scott joined the Masters in Restorative Justice program at the Vermont Law School, where she teaches a course focused on domestic and sexual violence responses. She has been privileged to have worked with organizations and coalitions in the movement to end gender-based violence throughout the United States and Europe. Ms. Transgaard Scott is a movement maker and alumna of Move to End Violence, a 10-year project designed to create new approaches to addressing gender-based violence. Her work allows her to deeply explore the synergies that arise when people join together in community, when organizations adopt transformative practices, and when organizations and people actively engage in power sharing and trauma healing. And I was so incredibly honored to moderate this conversation. And now we're going to queue up so that we can actually watch the panel.
Gabriella, if you could transfer the control over to me again so I could share my screen.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you so much. Go.
Welcome. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us in this really exciting discussion around trauma, faith, and spirituality. And one of the reasons that we're hosting this discussion is because we have heard time and time again from survivors, how faith and spirituality has played such a big role in their trauma risk, their trauma resilience, as well as their recovery and healing from trauma. And yet, so often, we don't necessarily have the kind of support or training or resources to really be present with survivors when these different kind of, concerns or resources are coming up. And so our hope today is to be able to really continue this conversation, and be able to just have some real talk together about how faith and spirituality and trauma kind of interact, and what we can do as people showing up to support survivors, to really support trauma resilience and healing. And as a companion to this panel discussion, we are also releasing a new guide called Faith and Spirituality in Trauma Resilience, Recovery, and Healing. And we hope that this guide can be a resource to support advocates and programs in increasing accessibility to advocacy services, safety and stability, and healing for survivors who identify faith or spirituality as a source of support or a source of struggle. Many times it can be both. That also will support programs and advocates in being able to cultivate cultural responsiveness and advocacy services, and really responding to matters of faith, spirituality, and belief as a dimension of culture. And finally, supporting trauma resilience. So going beyond trauma-informed services to really healing-centered services, and understanding how faith communities, and spirituality can be resources, as well as present risks to trauma resilience and healing. So first, we're going to start by just going around, and each of our panelists is going to introduce themselves. And so when each of you introduce yourselves, if you could also answer this question, which is, what brings you to this conversation? Why are we even having a conversation around trauma and spirituality in the context of surviving domestic or sexual violence? And we'll start with Belinda.
Hello, everyone. I am Belinda Stiles. So happy to be here with this panel and to be having this discussion. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a faith practicer. I'm here because there's been no point in my existence thus far that faith and spirituality hasn't had a presence in the way that we grow, develop, experience, heal, and stretch. And so I think for a long time, we've been told to sort of keep that in our pocket or keep it over there. But I don't think that we can really move through life without incorporating it in people's lives and being present for it. So I'm happy to be here. I think we find purpose and a pathway in our faith and our spirituality. And we do better by talking about it and not just keeping it in our pocket.
Yes, welcome. And thanks for being here.
Mm-hmm.
And Bonnie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bonnie Violet, and I'm a transgender queer spiritual drag artist and a digital chaplain. And the queer chaplain is really, I think, why I am here today. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. For so much of my work with community around nonprofit leadership and service provision, faith and spirituality was a place that we never went oftentimes. And as somebody who was in charge of things, I was very protective of my clients and the people in my community from church hurters or church hurt. But that was really led from a lot of my own personal church hurt. And I was letting my own trauma and my own experience kind of get in the way of potentially allowing others to connect spiritually with whatever it was that they were going on in their lives, specifically maybe around sexual assault, sexual identity, gender, able to access healing from my experience with trauma, sexual trauma and whatnot. And the biggest thing that opened it up for me was me, tapping into my spirituality and coming to understand things from a spiritual place, that then started to make sense of everything, and I could begin to heal and then also not continue to put myself in positions, to be harmed again. So that's a lot of why I'm really excited about this, because it's a very sensitive and difficult conversation, I think, to bring it up with clients, because so many people have been harmed, especially in the LGBTQ queer community and whatnot. And so I think talking about it, but also not being scared to go there, is really important. So I'm really just glad to be a part of this conversation today.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. And then going to Karen.
Thank you, Gabriella, and hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. Brenda and Bonnie, everything you said really resonates for me. I am coming to you from the unceded lands of the Abenaki people in northern Vermont. And in Vermont, I work at the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, and my role there is as its executive director. So I'm so pleased to be a part of this conversation because, for the past several years, I've been a part of a different group that's been talking about spirituality and faith in our movement and the role that it plays in not only how we interact with each other, but also how the role that faith and spirituality plays in our own lives. And this group of people got together one day about 4 or 5 years ago, and we asked ourselves the question, is violence the inevitable result of loss of spirit? And that question, it was a simple question at the time. That question just keeps coming up. It just keeps coming up when I think about how we handle people who cause harm, how we recognize the harm that each one of us also cause in our lives, and how we respond to a system that's really built around the idea of domination, white supremacy, and how the role that's this connection to spirit not only supports healing in our relationship with people that we serve, but also healing inside of ourselves. And I really fully believe that healing inside of ourselves is the first step to being able to engage effectively with each other around, really simple things like how do we help folks find housing? It's how we become our best selves. All the studies show that spirituality and faith is an important component of every life where folks are thriving. And so I think it's just really important for us to recognize that. And, when I think about my long career, in this movement, I feel like I've been around since God was a baby, no pun intended. And, almost 30 years of this movement. I think about hasn't our work always been about spirit? Hasn't it always been about faith? If we understand that spirit and faith is about connecting to our soul, to our creation, to the earth, to whatever your faith leads you, wherever it leads you, isn't that what our work is fundamentally about? Is the connections to the faith in the future, to hope, and to the understanding that we are all connected to each other. So for me, this work has always been about faith and spirit, always. And so I'm just so happy to be part of this conversation today and to listen to these brilliant people talk about their own experiences. I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you. Thank you.
And we're so grateful that you're here, Karen. Thank you. And then last but not least, Jeanette.
Hi, I'm Jeanette Garcia. I already feel like so energized just in the introductions. I'm really excited for this conversation. So I have 29 years clean and sober and started my journey of healing. And I have also worked at Haven in Stanislaus County, which is a domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking organization for 24 years. So I kind of feel like it's a parallel track to, I definitely have to do my own work in order to do the work. And kind of what I felt is everything is so compartmentalized just in my own healing journey, like everything, and none of it's trauma responsive. So you go to the doctor for medical, you go to, everything. We are so connected physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. But what happened for me and what I see happens for so many because of the spiritual harm that's happened, there's a devoid of that, to like, okay, I'm just getting rid of that and completely block that. And then realize that, yes, there was a lot of harm, but that's also the path back, like you said, to connection. To me, I felt like I can't even connect with others until I'm connected to myself and the power greater than self. And in order to be, because that's the trauma is the opposite of all that. It's disassociated, apart from, numbing out, avoiding. And so intimacy is such a powerful thing. And I think that's into me, you see. Like, I cannot run as fast as I can away from myself and hold still to connect with myself or others. And so at first I thought I was so different or like damaged or something's wrong with me, until I started doing this work and I thought, no, every single person I meet, that's what spoke to is the spiritual path is something that everyone struggles with in their healing journey. And at the time when I needed the most care and support, the people I went to, which often were, faith leaders, it was more victim blaming, more pain at the time I needed it the most. And so it took a while to get to that point where I was open and willing and vulnerable enough to like look into. But to me, the spiritual path was the way back to my authentic self. And I'm learning every day still. Like, it's definitely a process for myself. And I do a lot of trauma support work in all of the adult treatment centers in our county, because overall these years of 24 years, my focus has been the connection between trauma and substance use and other kinds of self-harm, eating disorders, because I think that is what I did to cope or medicate from that deep pain. So to me, spirit's the solution, the answer, and I'm just so grateful to be here.
Yes, welcome. We're so glad you're here. So my first question for all of you, and I welcome all of you to just, jump in and flow in and out of conversation, however feels right. So my first question is, what are some ways that faith or spirituality have been important in your understanding of trauma? And that could be in your work, or that could be personally as well.
I think about trauma, and I am a survivor of domestic violence, sexual assault, childhood sexual abuse. There was this shame cycle. So the perpetrator would be really skilled at this abuse or violence that I internalized, and it became like a self-loathing and like just that whole thing. If I did this different, maybe they wouldn't, and just really internalize that at a very young age. And then that shame continued to where, okay, how do I live with that? And so it was a lot of maladaptive behaviors, like I said, harm to self, substance use, things like that, which created more shame. And it just kept going more and more and more, that shame, until I didn't just feel unlovable, I knew I was unlovable. And I felt unworthy. Basically, literally at this point, almost even a loss of will to live, just like there's no space for me in this world. And so it was hopeless, it was desperate, it was apathetic, just to this place where I think if my spirit was a light, it was soaking wet, just like in the closet, dark, completely soaking wet. And that's to me what I understood about what happened, how I lost my way.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think spirituality did for me was it revealed that I had even been impacted by trauma. I was raised and brought up in a way that life was just really hard, crap, and all you had to do was just try to do well and keep going. And until I stopped and actually looked at myself, which for me was the spiritual process also of recovery. I hadn't even realized that I had all this baggage and trauma and all these reactions and behaviors that were all, I was a product of all this stuff that happened to me. And I didn't even know, I guess I thought I was this independent person that she was doing, she had it going on. And once I actually stopped to look, I was just overwhelmed. And that was part of it, is it was so much that I just couldn't deal with it. And getting to a space of spirituality, the spiritual space, finding community, finding folks who've been there before was really helpful. And just me even acknowledging that trauma had impacted me, and then to heal from it, and then actually to live beyond it, to actually live beyond your trauma. I didn't think it was ever possible, but I'm beginning to get little slivers of it from time to time, and it's been great.
Yeah, I mean, so much of what you both said resonates so much that I think I only understood my trauma. My trauma was the only thing present in my faith space, right? It was about being, such a wretched soul and downtrodden, and being the carrier of a burden, or all the burdens, being Black in America, under the white man's religion, carrying these burdens, and, being seen as a double negative. I remember this sort of battle growing up in church and around these ideas, and really, as I like to say, just really in battle with God is around, how can you tell me I'm so great if I am so bad in this same space? And really having to untangle these doctrines and untangle what faith and spirituality was for me, and that for me could be okay, and that it didn't have to be connected to someone else's something or look like someone else's something, that whatever resonated with me, I was good enough, right? That I was not only my trauma experiences, I was not only those things, but that I could create something internally, and that learning to create internally, right? That internal expression would have the most power as it came out of me. And so it's such a journey with such highs and lows of, for me, I'm like, I'm boxing because I don't like it, God. And then I'm like, well, okay, Goddess, you might be all right. And just really finding peace in knowing that it has its ebbs and flows, and that too being okay. It's everywhere, right? Karen, as you said.
Yeah, wow. So powerful. You three, so much of what you're talking about just resonates so much for me. I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse, and through that experience, this compartmentalization that you talked about, Jeanette, is so powerful, because the experience really, through that experience of that trauma, creates these walls around parts of your life, and then working for all these years in the nonprofit sector, which is a structure that's fundamentally replicative of, no offense, we all, work in this structure, but it's replicative of a patriarchal white supremacist model, and furthers the need for this kind of compartmentalization. And I can remember, many times in years past, it doesn't happen so much anymore, where we were asked to set aside our personal needs or our well-being, or set aside, no talking of spirit at all. It was forbidden. And there were, folks, if you tried to do that, then you were met with a lot of fear, people really afraid of it. And what a loss, what a real loss. I can remember talking to a spiritual leader and saying, I asked, what other practices I need to reintegrate, because I was feeling so fractured after all these years of doing this work. And, and I've come to understand through spiritual practice that, of course, we can recognize that traumatic experiences, something like child sexual abuse, is really traumatizing, of course. But then to really understand that we're working in structures and systems that magnify that trauma, even as we're trying to help others heal from their trauma. Yeah. That was kind of mind-blowing to me. Yeah. And, my work in the last several years has really been about how do we push aside the structures that are traumatizing, and how do we build work communities that help the folks that work inside of them thrive. And a lot of that has to do with the connection to spirit, whatever that spirit faith, whatever it is, whatever it is. And it's liberating. It's it's absolutely liberating. So I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of bringing spirit into our work and bringing spirit into conversations with everybody. With that, I mean, not proselytizing, obviously, but just understanding that we are so deeply connected. We are connected on biological, cellular levels. And if we focus on those connections, spirit thrives. It can't help but thrive. Yeah. And so that's, for me, that's a big pivot. Yeah. So thank you three so much. What brilliant responses.
Thank you.
It's electrifying. I'm trying to stay in my seat.
Interpretive dance is welcome. And so we've been using some different terms, right? Like faith and belief and spirituality and spirit. And, these can all mean different things to different people, right? And so I wonder if we could just take a moment and even just share what some of, how we make sense of some of these different words. And then what are some ways that we can really tap into how people experience and describe their own experience of these?
Yeah, for sure. What as I was thinking about this today, I was making some notes, and I was thinking about just that, right? Like, how do we describe this? And I'm a major fan of making up phrases and creating new definitions for words. Some people love it; it drives other people insane. But when I think about faith and spirituality, it made me think about like gumbo, right? So growing up very traditional Christian church, with, all of the hurt, harm, and beauty attached to that name, those structures. Over the years in my work practice of meeting coworkers who had different, faith identifiers, right? Be they Wiccan or, Buddhist or whomever, I got the opportunity to learn, right? And to learn not just the scripted boxes of descriptions, but practices, right? These practices that become so valuable that however you decide to identify yourself or not, that the magic is sort of in the practice, that I pray and meditate, right? That and I may hold a crystal and play with tarot cards, right? That there are all these opportunities to connect to spirit. And for me, that's the jam. Like, that's the excitement of being able to, kind of have my stuff, but move my stuff back to step into the place of being a learner and an explorer and understanding, like taking the journey with someone as they find their practices from wherever they come from that really feel empowering and encouraging. And so that's not much of a definition, but it's definitely, definitely an excitement around learning and growing in a way that says that my faith and my spirituality and how I get to name it. That's obviously that's an important thing for me, right? That you all see that being able to name it for yourself is where the magic is. So gumbo is my definition.
I love that so much. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I would just say really briefly, I love the idea of gumbo. The thing about I guess for me, I was raised in the Roman Catholic faith and got spit out by it when I started identifying as a member of the LGBTQ community, and what I've come to understand through my own spiritual practice and my own spiritual study is that the structures can be the problem. The thing about spirituality and faith for me is how do I gain understand exactly what you're saying, Belinda? How do I gain understanding about the people and their hearts that are sitting inside those structures, even when structures are supporting people to cause harm. You know, how do I still find the humanity of those people? And for me, that definition is really the definition of spirituality. It sits inside of that practice. And sometimes, you know, that practice is really difficult or uncomfortable. But today I have what I would call as a quasi Zen practice. And what I've learned from those practices is the art of deep listening, just really sitting and listening, which is again the core of our work. Deep listening. So thank you, Bonnie. Thanks for letting me jump in there.
Yeah, no, of course. I was just thinking, like, the big thing, like, I can have my own definitions for what works for me, and usually the definitions fail at some point. But I think one of the things that's really helpful and what I love is just to be able to ask questions and to guide an individual in asking more questions, because I think sometimes you hear somebody will say they're a Christian or they're a Buddhist or they're Jewish, but what does that really mean? I mean, that doesn't say anything. That doesn't say what they actually believe. It doesn't say what they don't believe in. That doesn't say how they access it. And I think for a lot of folks who have been told they're not allowed to access God, they're not allowed to be in religious spaces, you know, spirit, like our spirits, like, are there all along. Like, they don't just, like, they're there. Like, for us to not have a relationship with it is a delusion. It's not reality, and we're just not seeing it. It's a blind spot. And so I think helping folks identify, well, what is it that lifts your spirit? You know, what is it that animates you, that causes you to, like, come up out of your funk, or, you know, like, even helps you be comfortable in those still moments. And, you know, for me, when I was young, it was like, sometimes it involved drugs and going on the dance floor and, like, you know, just, I mean, it would, like, I wouldn't say, like, you know, but, like, I wasn't able to access God. And so I had to find a new way to soften the blow of life and to be able to exist in life, and want to be on this earth, you know? And so I think we all do that. And I think for a lot of us who have experienced trauma, you know, it might be difficult for us to recognize that. But I think asking the questions, asking more and more and more questions. And if people aren't feeling it now, asking them, when did you feel it? What worked for you in the past? When did it stop working? Why did it stop working? All those sorts of things.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Yes.
It is so great. It's amazing just even talking about spirit. It's like in such an enlightening and powerful thing. Yeah, you just feel it in your core. You know, for me, so much of the definitions really hung me up. You know, I grew up in a really strict religious in Utah, and it was very much focused on you are praised for sacrifice, serve to the last drop, be pure. Oh, wow. If you were not pure, that's it. It's over. Game over. And so for a person who's sexually abused by a person in that religious system, before you can even cognitively know, because you're just a little kid, it really, so what happened was there was just an indoctrination of all these labels, you know? And so then I get clean and sober, and the whole part I was trying to avoid, going to 12-step, where it's higher power and who you choose to call or understand God, really hung me up, because I was like, oh no, this is taking me right back to my trauma. When they said God. And so my sponsor said, you know, think of good, orderly direction, or a group of drunks, like, take the labels away. And so I remember, and again, I heard so many people around me, Heavenly Father and things like that. And I didn't even understand until about 2 years clean and sober, that what was so difficult for me to trust and turn my will over to this higher power was just that gender. Like, okay, so like my dad, who died an alcoholic at 44, who I won't even go into all the trauma I saw with him. And then my stepdad, who's everything assigned to father, was so debilitating. I couldn't access it because my trauma, my fight, flight, freeze, everything I just couldn't relax. And then I would hear people in mental health or in a women's retreat saying, close your eyes. Okay, talk about Heavenly Father, now close my eyes. And then I would look around, everybody else was doing it. And I would think, well, what's wrong with me then? So I remember at one point, just praying. And it felt like that game that little kids play where you look for something and somebody says cold, warm, warmer, hot. I felt like my spiritual journey was like that. Like I was so close and it'd be like cold, and it was that trauma wall that would come up. And so all of a sudden I just started realizing, I think I'm going for what the title is or the definition is, all about the wrong way. I started thinking, pay attention, because what I knew spirit was really good at was telling me when it wasn't okay and what didn't feel good. And that's where my journey started, was, I didn't know the words like peace or lack of peace, or like, because I lost my voice. The religion, the abuse, everything, I couldn't even hear that quiet, my voice that said, this is for you, or run. Like all those systems were short circuited. And so when I could hold still enough, and it took a while, just substance free, I would say 2 years before I could even sit still. I have a funny story. So my daughter was 2 when I got clean and sober. And one day I had 2 years clean. So she's 4 and I'm doing my hair in the mirror and she's looking at me funny. I said, what? She said, you're pretty. And I said, you just now noticed that? And she said, I never seen you hold still. And that's like 2 years clean, right? So first of all, the fog had to lift enough, just physically, emotionally, and mentally, just because of all that damage, for me to say, you know what, I'm not going to complicate this. And like everybody said, like curiosity was the word that I heard in what every one of you said. I'm just going to be curious. Like what feels good? What calls me? What energizes me? And then basically I learned from that. What I didn't want called me to what I want now. And if there were any labels or definitions, it's changed so many times in my journey that I can't. And so the cool thing about that is, like, I just want to keep learning, keep growing. And what I feel or believe today usually grows or changes next year. And so yeah, it's just like a lot of different things. And it's so big to me. If I could define it, then it's not a power greater than me.
Yeah.
You know, and every day I see my higher power show off in so many different ways. And so, yeah, I think that there's just more to explore.
Yeah. Oh, Jeanette, I love it. I love, like, just thank you so much. Like, you know, it's, you know, when you talked about, you know, that identification of gender, right? You know, I just remembering and thinking about my own journey and the struggle of God being Father, and you know, I couldn't sit with it, and I remember, you know, just like a common scripture that would be, you know, stated all the time, that, you know, we are made in the image of God. And I remember this moment where this light bulb went off, and I was like, shut up. So if we are made in the image of God, then God is both God and goddess, that I am not just property, that I am not just, right, that I am not just below, but I am God, that God is within me, that if God says whatever I speak forth, I should expect to not return void, that it will show up for me. Like, yo, that's my power too. And I just remember the moments of really being able to be free in that, and continuing to be curious. And now the most exciting part of faith and spirituality, and thinking about trauma no longer having a hold, such a tight hold, is that I have the opportunity to continue to be curious. And I can change my mind as often as needed and necessary. And I can hold on to the things that serve me, and I can release the things that don't serve me. And yeah, that's the excitement. That's like, I've got chills. Thanks, Jeanette.
Thank you so much.
So there's this complexity, right? This complexity of how, you know, often there's this question of, you know, is faith and spirituality good for us? Is it harmful? And it's like it can be all of the above, and it can be all of the above at the same time. And so what are some ways that you've been able to really be present with people and really help kind of tease apart some of the hurt, some of the harm, with also the sources of support and healing and empowerment, because I'm hearing so much of that right now, right? Like, so what are some ways that you've been able to be present with folks within that complexity? And how can advocates kind of be present with folks within that complexity?
Well, you know, I think this is just a really interesting question. There's the thing that my spiritual belief teaches me is about embodiment, and about the idea that we actually, if we embody spirit, then we're so much better able to express it and to connect to other people's spirit. You know, it is all really complex. And one of the things that is true about my own spiritual journey, I guess I can talk about myself, is that, you know, I was raised in a Catholic faith, so there's a lot of information coming in about sin and about being good, what it means to be good, and of course, you know, an underlying theme of hide it if you're bad. You know, don't just hide it, because because you're going to be punished if you're bad. And that dynamic, that structural, you know, concept interrupts your ability to actually be honest with yourself and to be able to receive input that that you've caused harm. And so my spiritual journey has been one of the unanticipated realities of it is the deeper I've come to understand my own relationship to spirit, the better I can hear that I've caused harm. And I think for a white person in the United States of America in 2021, this is really important. It's really important because I got to reckon with it, right? And I got to do all the things that I got to do. The other thing that occurs to me is this, you know, Catholicism, my spiritual background, my faith background was always, you know, I didn't anticipate I'd be talking about being a Catholic so much in this conversation, but you never know where it's going to go. The thing about Catholicism is about, you know, you're doing all these things in this life to improve your chances of getting to heaven and keep yourself from going to hell. This concept just, you know, loomed so large for me, and it's a black and white concept, right? It's a concept that leaves very little room for the complexity that you're talking about, Gabriella, and no room at all for the gray. And all of life is gray. It's all gray. So I guess, you know, for me, this structural condition is one that's really important to examine and interrogate and bring in the curiosity that you were talking about, Jeanette, because I feel like the structure is often the thing that sets us up for limitations or for harm or for, you know, for causing harm. So, you know, when I was in my 20s, I made this pivot to Buddhism. And one of the things I was really intrigued about Buddhism was that intrigued me about Buddhism was this idea of, oh shoot, now I can't remember the word, you know, living multiple lives. Help me out, friends.
Reincarnation.
Thank you. Reincarnation. And I have this whole construct around reincarnation. And just maybe 2 years ago, so this is like 40 years later, after living almost my whole adult life, thinking about reincarnation and what it would mean to be reincarnated, and repeatedly saying to myself, I'm going to do that in my next life. I'm going to do that in my next life. I'm going to go deeper in my next life. I'm going to be closer to myself. I'm going to love myself more. Next life. I was talking to a spiritual teacher of mine, and I was telling her about this idea of reincarnation. And she said, well, your next life is the next moment. You know, reincarnation is for, you know, that's where reincarnation sits. In every single moment, the reset, the next life. And so I take that with me everywhere now. And when I think about it's pervading like all of my thinking. When I think about what is real today, what seems black and white today, I ask myself the question, what's the next life look like? What's this look like in the next minute? And how am I going to choose to be in that next minute? So I mean, I don't know that I got to your question, but it's all, the thing about, for me, about spirituality and my faith is that it's continuously changing. And every single step of that change has been an enlightenment and an opportunity for liberation.
Yeah, yeah. You know, Gabriella, thinking about your question, Karen, Bonnie, and Jeanette, I think you all spoke to it as we got started, talking about the deep listening, right? That deep listening and that being curious, that and dealing with our own stuff, and you know, beginning to work through our own stuff, right? That those are those real key components to being able to sit in that space with someone else, right? Because we have that connection and level of empathy when we know we're at home, kind of wherever we are, in the car, walking down the street, in the grocery store, within our own experience, and listening, you know, for ourselves. That increases our empathy when we're sitting with someone, and knowing that because it's a journey, it's a unique journey for each of us. You know, walking in with that, I think allows us to, you know, to kind of go in a place where our palms are open, where we're open, right? And we can sit, and whatever shows up, we can welcome, because we're not in a defensive stance, right? We're not promoting our own interests. We're not moving on the interests of someone else. That the nature of our work, right, is really showing up for other people and really listening to what they need and desire and all the things. So I think being drawn to the work gives us a natural piece of that, but the continuous practice for ourselves of deep listening and dealing with our stuff and being curious are those components to being able to sit in the complexity with someone else.
I think one thing that was coming up in what you were talking about, everyone, and I don't know if this is in alignment, but I think the thing that came up for me was just finding my place in being able to have these conversations. I don't think it's probably appropriate for me to have this conversation with just anybody. So I think part of it is being able to be mindful enough to know what I might bring to the table for somebody else who's going to experience me, to not let that get in the way of my ability to maybe still show up, but to try to be as mindful about that as possible, which I think is something that we've all come to learn over the years, just in service provision, you know, community, who, like, people who are part of community usually serve their community best, and they're usually trusted first, and, you know, those sorts of things. And I think with spirituality or spiritual matters, I think it's very much kind of the same thing, that they need to, I don't know, I think especially like as a queer person, I think, I don't know that I would have heard, I know that a big part of my opening to spirituality again was being able to see and hear other people exist, as queer, full queer people who were happy, well-adjusted, and talked about some sort of spirituality. I just didn't even know that was possible. I didn't know that was something that could happen. I didn't even know it was something that I wanted. But once I was able to see it, then I knew it was possible. And so I think that's like a big part of it, is just being able to, I don't know, that's just what came to mind.
Yeah, that is so excellent. Like each person, like I'm glad that we're going to have this recording because I need to listen to this several times again, because each of you have said things that just make my mind go off in another tangent. But you know, I think that spirit, like, I always ran faster than the speed of feelings. And part of that is that trauma. Like, I can't hold still. The sky will collapse if I hold still. I'll either get hurt or I'll hurt myself. And when I finally got to that space of connection, that spirit, so it's grace, get out of my head. Get out of what I'm thinking. When I can like hold still and just meet people where they are at that level, like when I can just hold still and not try to overanalyze, complicate, out of the emotion and out of my head, like that light is already breathing. I always think about like those coals in the barbecue when you think that they're all out, but if you were to just blow on it, and there's actually a scripture about that, smoldering flax, and blowing on that fire is raging inside. It's really hot. And so to me, it's the spirit. Even now with you, my spirit's connected. Like there's like a just really strong force. And I think when I can get out of my head and all those structures we were talking about and everything, and just be with someone, like you said, listen, be curious, then my light, my spirit connects to theirs so naturally. Like, and it took a while doing the work. I remember when I first worked crisis lines, people would be talking to them, I'd be writing all these like referrals and numbers I wanted to give them. You know, I wasn't listening.
Mhm.
And when I could actually get out of all that and just relax, and like, it took a long time. It took me to understand, like, higher power saying, like, right now, in this moment, I am enough, I have enough, and I do enough.
Yeah.
Right now, not after a number on a scale, not after a certain promotion, like right now, because I'm human. And every person sitting with me, we're human right now in this moment. And it's not human doings, it's human beings.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so when I could just settle down into that, I'm grateful that I didn't burn out and that I did my work, because I got to a place where I could settle down. And just, I want to meet people where they are in every way. And in the same way, I would never say, oh, you're an abuser, they're awful, like you should leave them. I would never say anything like that. It's the same with the person's faith or whatever. Like, we meet them where they're at. If that person thinks their partner's going to change and that they can change, I mean, I love that. I mean, meet them where they're at, like in the same way spiritually. Magic happens. And it's the spirit's work, not mine. When I can let go, then it's the spirit who does all that. So many times when I've gone into a group or gone into work with a client, I have this like agenda or like all these goals or whatever. The best things have happened when none of it happened. And then when I left, I was like, whoa, spirit just blew my mind.
Totally.
Like, I love that. And then it makes me trust higher power more, because then it's like, I just suit up and show up, and the results are not mine.
Yeah, yeah. Make room for the evidence, right? Like, just we move out the way and make room for it. You know, Bonnie, you said something, you know, that made me think about when we're brave enough to be seen, it's really an offering, you know? That, you know, I think about the same thing, and just the requirements to show up so specifically in the faith that I was raised in. And how fearful I was to be like, well, you know, I kind of dig a little something else, or actually adding in this other thing kind of, you know, actually feels nicer than that. Like, you know, really that fear of sort of coming out of that. And it wasn't until I saw another Black woman who said, I incorporate these things in my faith practice because they are a part of our history, that before we came here to this place, you know, that our incorporation of gods and goddesses was real and still is real. You know, that it wasn't until someone showed up in front of me being their full selves that I thought, oh yeah, I need that. Oh, that's right on. You know, and so that when we are brave enough to show up and be seen, when we make room for the evidence, we really make an offering to those who are sitting with us. You know, I really do believe that that as we are called to this work, that the greatest thing we can do is show up as ourselves, because there are people waiting to see us being us. That helps to offer permission and safety for them to show up in their best selves, and to take that journey. So yeah, I just, again, a great deal of appreciation for all that you all have shared.
I love that. What comes to me is offering and palms up.
Mm-hmm.
That is so, in my mind, so powerful.
So in our last, we have about 10 minutes left. So in our last 10 minutes, just of the panel discussion part, I want to hear from each of you and recognizing, there are real reasons why people avoid conversations about faith and spirituality, right? And a lot of it, can come from a place of not wanting to impose our own beliefs, or not wanting to, say something that might cause someone harm, that might be a trauma reminder, right? But everything we've talked about today just illustrates how important it really is to show up when people are bringing these conversations when they're kind of raising these thoughts, and that sometimes people might not raise these thoughts because they feel like they'll be shut down if they do. And so sometimes people also need an opening or an invitation, right?
Yeah.
So how can we do that in ways, or I'll phrase it this way. What are kind of, for someone who is listening, who's watching, and they want to dip the toe in, but they are like, where do I even start? I am so worried that I'm going to say the wrong thing and really, harm someone or, just make it really exert my power in a way that isn't really survivor led, right? So what are some tips for that person listening right now?
Well, one big thing I think is that maybe you're not the one to have that conversation with that person. I know I keep saying that, but I think, when people come into a doctor's appointment or a mental health appointment or whatever, we ask a lot of questions about to assess people's mental health. They're like a lot of different things, but we never ask a few questions about your spirit. And I think that those are I think we could come up with I've always wanted to do this for years, especially working in STDs. And I wanted to ask people about their spirit when they come in and get tested for syphilis. But part of it is just asking, how is your spiritual, what is a little bit of your history around spirituality or religion, and how does it impact you? And then are you open to talk with somebody more about it? And that way it's just asked, and then you kind of have permission to go there, and you have a little bit of information about what's going on. Because a lot of the time, sometimes, at least when I was dealing with STDs and stuff, they happen, but often there's lots of shame and lots of other things that are combined in that, which just leads to more disease in the future and more harm. And so I think if we're able to potentially address the shame through a spiritual element, then we might even lead to less syphilis, let's say.
Yeah, that's what I think about holistic. To me, that's a natural, it's really spirits connected to everything, and to me, that's such a natural fit because it is what we don't ask, and then I'm careful about certain symbols, music, different things, because for my first thought is I don't know the spiritual trauma. I don't know where they've come from. And so I'm mindful in my office and just places that I might be. I first want to engage and build a rapport and a trust and listen. I think I don't know, I feel like people who've been on my healing journey earn the right to participate. And so I always just want to show up in a way that it is led, follow their lead. I wouldn't walk up to somebody and just say, here, let me pray with you. I don't know how they pray. I don't know if that would be appropriate. And maybe somebody who molested them prayed with them. So I always want to follow the lead. If it was a dance, I'm following their lead, but I want to meet them where they are. And so even there's times that I have no idea, a couple of times I was not at all familiar with the culture and religion at all. And then I used to feel bad I don't know, I just had this thing I should know more, and so instead what I do is I just want to be respectful, but I want to ask questions. And then they love to tell me about it. Well, this is why we do this, and this is the meaning attached with this. And so I just feel again, spirit kind of takes over. If I just show up, it's just hard not to be in my head or be in fear. And so if I can just just hold still and listen, and then I want to validate and believe, just like we do in the rest of the work. I think I have those skills. We're taught to be authentic and be ourselves, and to believe and to validate, and to just all those ways that we do these things in safety planning or crisis intervention or case management. Those are the same skills. It's just that there was always this big don't do it when it came to the spiritual part. Yeah. And so sometimes, if I wrote down a list of questions that I would ask, I couldn't do it. It comes from spirit when I'm sitting with that person, and then the question comes up. Oh, well, did you grow up in that church? Just because that's what they're talking about. And then just those roads that were blocked, like a big roadblock, just as the relationship happens and spirit leads, I'm able to just go down roads really naturally. So I would just say, don't complicate it. It's really hard to put aside all of those things that the societally it just tells us don't talk, don't tell, don't feel, don't cry, don't snitch, be tough, never let them see you sweat. All those things, it is difficult, but I think just holding still, being calm, and let survivor lead.
I couldn't agree more with that. That list, I mean, taking notes, by the way, Jeanette, just because I'm learning so much from you. But the thing that what you brought up a couple really good tips, I think, that I want to underscore. This idea of being in an authentic relationship, and we have this false relationship to urgency, I think, sometimes in our work, where we've got to get, we've got to get the forms filled out, and we've got to get the demographic information documented, and that all has to get up into the computer, and those administrative tools can sometimes really interrupt our ability to be in an authentic listening relationship with folks, sitting next to us in the office. And this idea of curiosity, like, just ask, and we all know that folks may not want to talk about it at first, but the point is to ask, and then listen, and let there be some space for silence and some space for breath. I'm a big believer in aligning breath. If you breathe 3 times together with somebody, your heartbeats line up. So, I think that's just a really beautiful way of creating that authenticity and that connection to folks. I love this validate and believe. And I think it's also really important for us to recognize the role that ego plays, and this role that which gets to what you were talking about in some ways for me, Bonnie, this idea that we are the people who are can bear witness, even if the evidence is there that somebody else might be the right person to be with this person. And so just recognizing that. And then I think it's also just really important for us always to be sensitive to power differentials. And basic advocacy 101. Somebody's asking for help, there's an immediate relationship to power that sits inside of that relationship. And so we have to just really be sensitive to that. So all the good practices that go with that, and other parts, as you said, Jeanette, other parts of our work sit with this conversation about spirit and faith as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, all the things already said, the incorporation of the question, just normalizing the conversation. Hey, it's a thing. Is it a thing for you? You want to talk about it? No, that's cool. It's here if you want to, right? So just that incorporating the question in our regular practice, and offering the opportunity, inviting, right? Inviting it in if it is a thing. Happy to be here with you in it. Asking permission. I just, again, all the things that were stated, validating what shows up. And I love that, this false relationship to urgency. We could just go ahead and calm down and just make some room. Love that. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and I think bringing up the conversation with folks, I think sometimes for me, mental health and spiritual health was the same thing. There is a difference between my mental health and my spiritual health. And I didn't know that for a long time. And sometimes it's still blurry. And so I think being able to bring up the idea of spiritual health, your own spirit, and checking in that aside to mental health, I think just helps people realize that there's another part of themselves that they could be tapping into.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. This has been an amazing conversation. I am just so excited to hear from folks who are listening, what you're taking away from it, how you're putting this into action, what's the impact, right? What's the difference it's making in your own connection to yourself, to your advocacy, and then how we're showing up with survivors to really be present and survivor-led. I want to thank all of you. Listening to you has been, I just feel like I've been eating spiritual food for the past hour, like just so full of spirit and so energized. And I could not be gladder to be doing the work with each and every one of you. And just thank you for being a part of this discussion. And thank you for showing up in the world every day as yourselves, as your authentic selves, offering your authentic selves. It is really the greatest gift that we can offer one another. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Amazing.
Welcome. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. All right. What an amazing panel. Oh my goodness. Just so honored to be able to host that panel. And so now we're moving into the question answer part of our session today. And so going back to some of the different questions that folks have entered in the chat and the Q&A box, and please feel free to enter more questions. We definitely have left a fair amount of time for questions. So the first question, and I'll read the question out loud, and then I'll provide some thoughts as well as point out some different pieces of the guide that might be especially helpful. So the first question, Jessica shares, I'm a therapist and I work with survivors of domestic and sexual violence. I am an ethical humanist, but was not raised in a faith community. However, for many of my clients, faith and spirituality is very important. I listen and support them, but what else can I do to support my clients who are religious when I am not? Such an important question. And so first of all, I'll say you're already doing so much, which is beneficial. Listening to them, supporting them, even asking the question. And the self-awareness, the self-knowledge of what is your perspective and how might that influence kind of how you show up with folks. And so first and foremost, that self-awareness and that self-knowledge, to be aware of our own perspectives. What do we bring to the interaction? As we heard our panelists discuss, we're not here to proselytize, we're not here to convince, we're not here to put our own beliefs or ways that we connect onto anyone else, right? Always being survivor-led. And the way that we do that is first even knowing what do we bring to the table. In the guide, Appendix A has some different resources to get a sense of that self-awareness and self-knowledge. From there, then we really want to work on developing our comfort with talking with people about beliefs, practices, communities, if they identify as part of a faith community or maybe have in the past or want to, what all of this means or doesn't mean to them. And so the more that we can get comfortable with talking about this with people, and more importantly, listening, then the more prepared we are to really support folks regardless of our experience with religion or spirituality. And here I see, Jessica, that you're doing that you listen to them. So often that's so much of what's needed, is being able to be actively present and listen. Too often people who identify with a particular religion or express a spirituality, too often the experience is that when they share that gets somehow kind of ignored or skipped over. And sometimes we ignore it or we skip over because we don't really know what to do with it. And that's very human. At the same time, it can feel people leaving like, I just told you this thing that really matters to me. And it just seemed like you didn't even hear it, right? So there, that listening is, many times we don't have to do much more than that. Now, one thing that we can do, in addition to listening, if someone is sharing this with us already, is also just asking if they'd like us to include any aspects of their faith or spirituality in their time with us. And if so, how could we include some attention or incorporate some of the things that they value within their faith or spirituality during our time together? And that's something that we can integrate into mental health services as well as advocacy services, and just remaining survivor led and asking folks, how would they like us to include what they're sharing with us, or be responsive or sensitive to what they're sharing with us in our time together, in our services together? Then I see another question here. And I also see that, Jeanette and Bonnie are here today as well. Folks may have noticed that we had recorded the conversation and played the recording, but Jeanette and Bonnie are here today. And so Jeanette and Bonnie, so wonderful to have you here. And please, please feel free to add anything else in the chat, as well as just everyone who's here. Feel free to add your own thoughts in the chat as well. So with this next question, the person asked, what do you say to people struggling with their kindness in the workplace being vilified, or soulfulness in work and life being looked at with unfriendly skepticism? So here, what came to mind to me is how there is this there can be this culture around not discussing anything related to faith or spirituality, that has to be incredibly private, and then it leads to a situation where survivors are naming how incredibly important it is to be able to discuss both the parts that are challenging about faith or spirituality, as well as the parts that may be helpful or resources in healing. And then it leads to, organization and staff members who either feel unprepared or like it's somehow wrong to approach the work in this way. And so sometimes there can be a real mismatch here in organizational culture or leadership culture and what survivors are asking for. And then in this case, what staff are trying to provide in response. And so understanding that that sometimes the ways that organizational culture develops, or the way that, quote, professionalism gets translated, gets explained, is in direct clash to communities that experience marginalization, experience oppression, where cultural norms and cultural values are not being centered in those definitions or in that organizational culture. And so the first thing that comes to mind for me is what is happening within this workplace where these differences aren't seen as strengths, where these differences can't be embraced and celebrated. And that it is so incredibly painful to be judged on our strengths of kindness or soulfulness, to be actively coached against our strengths is so incredibly painful in a workplace. So what do we do with that? Well, most often, what we need to do when these situations come up is that everyone needs to be able to get to a place where we can approach it with openness. Openness and transparency. What is the actual concern, right? What is it a what if situation? Well, your kindness, they're going to think that, you're their friend rather than their advocate, right? Like, is it a what if situation, right? So what is the actual concern? And even better if we can talk about actual instances rather than what ifs. And within that conversation, is there a space for us to explore different ways of seeing things, different ways of showing up in the work, different ways of us connecting, right? When I was leading programming, I found the most important thing was to have diverse teams, diverse in every way possible, because we know that the healing is based in connection, but what we don't know, what we can't always predict, is exactly who someone is going to connect with. And it reminds me of what Bonnie was saying on the panel, that, it may not be this one person, or you may not be the person to have this conversation with them or to connect with them in this way. It may be someone else. So is there a space for us to explore cultural differences, human diversity, and find ways to both work together with respect, honoring one another's wholeness and dignity, while also, even better, embracing those differences, not being threatened by them, but embracing them. And certainly not making anyone feel like they're lesser than because of kindness or showing up in ways that may seem more spiritual. And that being responsive and supportive with matters of spirituality and faith are part of cultural responsiveness. So if there's a different way that the organization wants us to show up, okay, that's a conversation. We can get more information on what best practices are, what that looks like, how that gets defined across cultural differences and life experiences. But the answer is never just ignoring faith and spirituality and pretending that we're all culturally the same or that we're all going to show up in the same way. Another question I see are there steps that the panel would recommend to someone seeking help with connecting to their spiritual self? And so I'll invite Jeanette and Bonnie to enter in the chat. And then I'll also add that while faith traditions and religious identity is something that some people may identify with and other people may not, that spirituality, the way that it's defined and understood, is that it's actually a dimension of the human experience. That it's, one can be, humanist, atheist, agnostic, and still absolutely connect with a spirituality that may be, based in human relationships, that may be based in the cosmos, that may be based in nature, that may be based in the arts. So understanding spirituality as when we feel a sense of connection, both within and to something that goes beyond us or someone who goes beyond us, right? So it's about centering connection within and outward. And so when we are looking to explore that connection with spiritual self, the ways it shows up is infinitely diverse. Sometimes there's ways that maybe we might have expected, like listening to a favorite song and really being wrapped up in the moment. There are songs I can listen to that I can feel my ancestors just peeking out and smiling, sometimes even giggling. Watching my young child play, that's a time that I can feel my ancestors giggle. Other times, that spirituality, the way that we feel it, connect, access it, can feel like so incredibly surprising. Like we were just walking, down the street, and the way that a leaf kind of fluttered to the ground in the fall, it just hit us in a way that we never thought it would, never had before, right? So different things speak to us at different points in our life. And what a beautiful place to explore from, to play within, and then to notice. So much of it is being able to just notice it. In the guide, Appendix A and Appendix C have some different resources that can help us both become more aware and appreciate some of the diversity around spirituality and what's sometimes called lived religion. And then Appendix C has some resources on a tree of contemplative practices, which obviously spirituality goes way beyond just contemplative practices, but that could certainly be a place to start. And I see here Jeanette and Bonnie entering in the chat. Jeanette says, approaching each day with a seeking and open heart. Spirit is faithful to draw you in, lead you to sacred circles of connection. Every person's path is unique and spirit-led. And then Bonnie also adds, seek elders and community. Ask for direction from those who seem to hold and reveal their spiritual self in a way you admire, appreciate, or are in awe of. Oh, thank you so much, both of you. And then here I see one more question that we have. So this question is, what can we do to not lose our own hope and faith as an advocate? The cruelty and violence in our world and systems can be so overwhelming, especially with the backdrop of potential world war. Yes, there are so many moments where it can feel, where not only it can feel, but it is so incredibly understandable that we can feel that loss of that sense of connection with our own hope and faith, especially as we bear witness to so much. So there's, my goodness, I'm going to ask everyone here to enter in the chat to help us, all of us out with this, because we have all experienced this. If not at one point, then many points, right? And as folks hopefully pour into the chat, I'm going to offer some pieces that are coming up for me. One is being really, really clear on our personal sense of meaning and purpose in how we show up in this work. And many times that extends for many people into how we show up in this world. And that for some people, this might be writing a personal mission statement. For some people, this might be, being with a loved one, and even just being open to receiving affirmations. And so, but in whatever ways we can connect to that meaning and purpose, connecting to it, spelling it out, and then finding a way to keep that really present. Because when I am accompanying somebody through all of the pain, it is incredibly hard to do that when I'm like, where are we going? Why am I doing this? Does it even matter? Does it even make a difference? Versus if I'm doing that really clear and connected in my meaning, my purpose, my personal mission in that moment. It can also feel hard when we continue to see more and more harm escalating. It can feel, it can make us feel so powerless, and it can make us feel despair and hopelessness. And so some things that have been helpful in those times is knowing that the process is so much longer than this one moment. And being able to reflect on past times that I have felt similarly, that I have felt like, oh my goodness, how could I possibly, help in such a difficult situation? Or how is there any way out of this, right? To be confronted with so much pain and so much violence. And I think of those past times and think of how it was hard to see kind of what came next or what came across that bend. But that being able to stay present to the best of my ability in that moment, that I may not know exactly what to do. I may not know exactly how this will resolve, but staying present and true in that moment, doing the best I can to be present in that moment. That so often, if I can stay present and connected and help whoever I am working with to also feel connected, feel like no matter what, they can keep coming back, and feel, and also work my best to, with a survivor-led approach still, to safety plan, do everything we can, right? That if we can help people stay alive and connected, everything in nature moves towards healing, and everything in nature moves towards balance. We often just need the right environment and time and support and resources, and that, right, everything will heal. And so sometimes it's just a matter of that growing comfort with not of the uncertainty. But I see here in the chat so much more has been shared. And thank you, everybody. I am going to go ahead, and we are at time. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Carla to wrap us up for this session. The guide is available on our website. A recording of today's session will also be available on our website for in about the next week or so. And just thank you to our panelists, to all the folks who made this happen today. And that includes all of you who joined us today and who, most importantly, are showing up and doing this deeply difficult but deeply important work every single day. Thanks so much. Back to you, Carla.
What a wonderful webinar. Thank you, Gabriella. Thank you, panelists, Jeanette, Bonnie, Belinda, and Karen, for the wonderful discussion we had today. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Once the webinar session is closed, you'll be redirected to participate in a survey. Please let us know what worked and what could have been better today. Within the next week, we will send a follow-up email with a link to today's recording, as well as a link to the faith guide and a certificate of attendance. We hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you again for coming.